one of the guys who was brought in by Liam and Ian, by Liam and Mike about 9 months ago from GDS. And I was dumped into the MOJ. I came in from the outside, so I'm relatively new to government. I used to say that I'm brand new to government, but I'm no longer. I've been there for about 9 months. And in the course of that, I've learned a few things. But my background has always been pretty much either in financial services or on the large vendor side. So I'd like to think of myself as a poacher turned gamekeeper. And I've been surprised at some of the things that I've seen. I'd like to talk about some of that. So coming from the outside, my expectation was probably pretty much like most people's. When people think about sort of commercially available digital services, they think of usually things to do with e-commerce or things like Facebook or whatever. But they're things which are very, very simple. They're things that you tend to seek out. They're things that don't usually stick a lot of barriers between you and spending money. They're things where quite frequently there's a lot of tinsel around marketing, where you want to sort of upsell or cross-sell or get somebody to do something else. And really nothing stands in the way of that. So you don't need, for instance, to have a lawyer or a solicitor tell you what button do you click next on Amazon to buy your book or to buy your game, right? It is very cleanly designed, And it's a very sort of different situation to what I found in government. Because in government, typically, we don't have customers. So all sort of the marketing stuff about customers and audiences and all this kind of stuff flies out the window. Because actually, people who use our services have no choice. They have to use us. And we have no choice in who they are. We can't be like a bank and say, oh, you're not profitable enough, please go away. In fact, quite often, the people who we're going to be serving are those who, in fact, are not profitable enough, right? And they're typically, in the case of Ministry of Justice, something even a bit further than that. Typically, they're people where something has gone terribly wrong in their life. People don't usually come to the MOJ because, they never come to the MOJ because something has gone terribly right. They come to the MOJ because their mother is about to become incompetent and they have to do a lasting power of attorney, because they want to visit somebody who's in prison, because they are the subject or the initiator of a lawsuit, because they need legal aid. All these kinds of things, which are typically not things anybody would ever seek out. In fact, no one does, right? It's something which befalls you. And when you're there and you're needing to use an MOJ service, your life has been turned upside down. You're not in a position of, happily choosing what beach you want to go to or which airline you should be taking or which book you might want to be buying. You're trying to navigate yourself through what's already a fairly complex process at a time when you're probably emotionally least prepared to do so. It's the nature of the services we offer. We can't really help that. And a great example of this is this persona of Sherry, who needs to visit a family member in prison. And the way that the prison visit booking service used to work in the past was that you'd have about a half hour to call a prison at the exact same time that everybody else was calling the prison to visit a family member. And you might have 1 or 2 people answering the phone. And those people were also doing all their other work at the same time, which basically meant you could be on the phone for that entire half hour on hold and then just be told, sorry, time's up, goodbye, and never make the visit. And so people would be jamming on the phone lines. If they did get through, they'd try to book all the times available, even whether they could make them or not, because you never know when you're going to be able to do so. And it was an absolute nightmare, right? And that is the kind of service that we were trying to figure out how to solve. So it's a rough situation if you're a user of the Ministry of Justice. And when I came, there was already a pretty well-established team. So I joined about January 6th of this year. And there was a very well-established team. There were about 75 people. And almost all of these people had come from the outside. So there were very, very few civil servants. There were very few people who had intimate knowledge of how the systems inside the MOJ actually work. And these people primarily came from a digital background. By that I mean agency background. They did an awful lot, many of them did an awful lot of greenfield work. Not too many of them had done an awful lot of integration work, or work involving substantial integration with existing systems for transactions. But it was a very, very talented and idealistic group of designers, researchers, developers, product managers, and so on. And they were trying to fix this situation of waiting for half an hour to visit somebody in prison. And what I saw immediately was they were outsiders. They had come in, and they saw how broken everything was, and they were sort of wondering, what should they do about it? And I think Liam alluded to sort of, agile waterfall type stuff. Actually, that's exactly what I saw. I saw basically teams who were trying to do a total service transformation in the case of the 4 exemplars. So we're doing 4 of the government's 25. But in the case of the 4 we were doing, they were taking very seriously this sort of mantra of total service transformation, end to end. And not being able to reconcile that with the other message that was coming out from GDS, which was MVP. Iterate, do something small, iterate, 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 iterate wildly until you get to where you want to get to, right? And it was really very, very difficult situation to find them in. There was a lot of emotion in the team. There was a lot of concern that we might not be able to meet our timelines. Keep in mind that the timelines we were talking about were March of next year, March of 2015. In January 2014, they didn't know if they could make that, any of them. The methods that they were using were kind of all over the shop, and they had been very much sucked into the Ministry of Justice's sort of way of doing things, because everybody they dealt with said, oh, well, this is how we do things. It's going to, oh, by the way, you want to connect to the system over here, or you got to, do this requirements document that can take you so long. You got to deal with this vendor over here. They're going to have to review it. It's going to take you so long. You might have to then go through this particular system over here. Oh, that's another change request, and so on and so forth. And we had to make some changes to that. My first report to my management was I had to rate everything red. And it wasn't a really happy thing for me because I thought, wow, I have a big team here. We're delivering great stuff. And as it turns out, they were trying. But they had got stuck into the idea of like endless scope. So what we wound up doing was deciding that we would drastically de-scope. Sometimes people think it's a bad word. I don't think it is at all. I think designing what is a good minimum viable product is the best thing you can possibly do. Having a shipping MVP is way better than a never delivered total service transformation. So first thing I learned was MVP is better than total service transformation. And the way you do that, or the way we've done that, is by forcing people to work within a really strict time box. So the idea of a transformation program which takes 18 months is not transformative. We say basically if you can't deliver it in 20 weeks, you're doing something which is way too big, rethink it again, and do something valuable within that 20 weeks. Don't talk about doing stuff that's going to take 2 years or a year. And what that means is that we can start delivering really world-class services within human timescales, not these glacial civil service timescales, but human timescales. So it actually makes a difference to real people's lives. And we start also building credibility with what's called the business inside government. I've been really surprised by that phrase, the business, because actually I don't think the government does business, but anyways, there's executive agencies, and we build credibility with them. We show that we actually do deliver. And not only that, and very, very importantly, we also show what we mean by iteration. Because many of the people in the agencies we've been dealing with have been traumatized, I think, by the fact that they have had systems delivered in the past, done in a very waterfall kind of fashion, and then when they were delivered, it's like, hey guys, it's done, it's finished. Oh, we didn't mean that. Oh, we didn't want this. Oh, we wanted the other thing on top of that. When you can't have that anymore because it's finished. So just like Liam said earlier, how we iterate, we do. We deliver first, and then we iterate, and then we iterate, and then we iterate, and then we iterate. Never ending until we deliver, until we finally filled out or saturated the functionality which the user needs. So the strategy really is delivering, and we've started to see that this actually has some effects, this approach. I guess the most important one is on, actually, I'll give you this. I'll skip through this basically, but this is basically the GDS alpha beta live continuum with our 20-week time box on top. But this is something which you go to our department, you'll see all over the place. This is kind of how we do business. And if you look at one of the exemplars, civil claims, and this is why it's important to think this way. If you look at this exemplar here, you'll notice that there's just a huge number of different endpoints of different parties. There's defendants, there's claimants, there's lawyers. There's all different kinds of claims that you can possibly be making. There's lots of different forms for these different kinds of claims, each of which follow a different kind of workflow, and so on and so forth. So if you're thinking, as a young product manager coming in from the outside, that you have to do a total service transformation on this, where do you start? And when do you know you're done? Because this is a really big picture. And that's exactly what they were looking at. And that's what people couldn't figure out how to do. And that's why people were starting to freak out. And that's why we had to rate everything red. And we said, what you're going to do instead is you're going to find a thing, and it's going to be this thing here, because that thing does deliver concrete value. We've done our user research. We do understand that there are lots of real problems with this particular thing. We know we can deliver this within 20 weeks, and we're going to deliver that. And after we've delivered that, we'll deliver that, and then we'll deliver that, and then we'll deliver that. That way the business knows that we are serious about iteration. That way we apply the user research to how we prioritize things. That way we deliver value to the citizens very quickly and no longer these long time frames. And the result of that is we went from not having any exemplars that we even thought were going to be able to be delivered live by March to having 3 of the government 6's exemplars live today. We're very proud of that, actually. I mean, I have to say we are. I think I have the best team that I've ever worked with in my life. And I'm not joking about that. But we would never have been able to do that if we hadn't been applying some very severe discipline to the work we do. So I guess that's one thing I really want to get across. Major lesson I learned here, learned it very quickly, but I think it's something which pretty much every team I've been working with and other departments probably should be thinking seriously about. Another one is, when we've been developing digital services thus far, and by the way, I'm this chief digital officer, not chief technology officer. When we deliver digital services thus far, we've been basically stuck in a mode, sort of an IT-ish kind of a mode, where we get these things called requirements, which come from executive agencies. Now, executive agencies are executing policy which has already been developed by somebody else. So they're already sort of down the sausage factory. And what we've been finding is that we're, on the one hand, talking about user-centered design, talking about user focus when we deliver our services, and yet we also have all this old legislation, we have all this old policy, we have all these old procedures, old systems, old habits, old culture, whatever you want to call it, lots of accretions of these things, which are constraints, which are massive constraints, because they're the things that tell you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do the third thing. And so the question, and it's all taken as a given, right? So that's just the way it is. So then we come in and say, oh yeah, but we do user-centered design. We do user research. We focus on what the user needs, not what the government needs. And I think there's a real contradiction between these two things here. I have to say it. And I think if you are working in digital and you're spending your time with your main interlocutor being the executive agencies, you're missing a trick. And that is very simple, that you should be working from the very beginning with your policy colleagues. Because many of the things which you think actually are problems or can't be solved can be. We found that out in the case of civil claims when we found it very, we were delivering a service which, at least on paper, I suppose, in some ways, was acceptable, was an acceptable service. But actually, when we gave it to users, we found out, the videos were amazing. The guy saying, I can't figure this form out. What are you trying to tell me? What do I need to do? Because you needed to have a lawyer to fill this thing out with you to do that. Which meant, well, what kind of digital service is that? Again, Amazon does not require you to have a solicitor sitting by you when you want to buy a book. Why are we doing the same thing? The reason we're doing that is because services are so rotten in some ways, right? The way we got around that was, instead of getting endless back and forths with an executive agency on this, we talked to judges and we talked with policy colleagues, because they're the ones who made the decisions on this kind of stuff. And we said, gee guys, does this really make sense? Isn't there some other way we can start presenting out the information to the users such that we can redesign what we delivered? And we did. And now we have something which we're very, very proud of, and we think is really great. We've discovered this pretty much across the board, that whenever we are in this kind of a problem, that our initial response, which had been to talk directly with the business, has almost always been wrong. And that we need to be talking with policy colleagues right from the very beginning. I think there's a larger lesson here too, which is that if you look at what policy people do, and if you look at what service designers do, they're very, very, very similar kind of work. And one of the things which we're trying to do now is to dissolve some of the boundaries between those two. And we're setting up a policy lab inside of MOJ, inside of digital, to do that. So that the next generation of digital services will be miles ahead of where they are now. So this is our program. We have a lot of stuff. So we have 4 exemplars. But we've also got like 16 other projects we're working on, almost all of which are the same size and scale as an exemplar. So we're doing an awful lot of work here. And the team right now is about 135 people, so I think we're the largest digital department outside of GDS in government. And it spans the breadth of pretty much everything that the MOJ does. It spans all of our executive agencies. It spans many of our ALBs. It goes into HQ. We're starting to develop services that are HQ kind of services, which could be spread across other government departments. So, Liam was also mentioning earlier, sharing stuff, not only public stuff, but also stuff that's internal. And one of the things which, of course, when you look at this list, you realize there's an awful lot of points of integration with existing legacy and with existing technology. So, another lesson, and this is, I think, another one which we learned, although we learned this one pretty quickly, is that there's so much to do. We need to have a division of labor between digital, between technology, and between the line of business, if you want to call it that, the executive agency, the business. And the way we've done it inside MOJ is pretty much following the standard quadrant, which Liam has put out there, but we've actually implemented it, which I guess makes it a good thing. And so from our perspective, digital is all about public-facing services and also the internal-facing services. If a user uses it, then it's designed and developed with the same care and ethos as something which we would design for the public. It doesn't matter if it's a public user or an inside user. We don't say that inside users don't count, because inside users are doing their work to serve the public. If they're not, they shouldn't be there. In infrastructure, all that stuff which it has to run on is the work of my colleague, Ian Sayers, the CTO. We work very, very closely with each other. And between the two of us, we also work very closely with the lines of business. Now, in the case of MOJ, we're going to wind up pushing digital inside the different agencies. So these things become more and more digital here. Digital starts moving into the business app space. And then the last big lesson, nearing the end, and this is one which I think is incredibly important, is that you're absolutely nowhere if you don't have your own in-house capability. I've seen a lot of other government departments trying to figure out how to do the digital stuff, how to roll out their services, or they've even been able to develop the digital services, but now I'm not sure how to maintain them. You have to have your own in-house capability. And that cannot be just a portfolio team or just a strategy team or just something like that. You have to have the ability to deliver. You have to have your own development team. You have to have your own designers, your own researchers, your own product managers. You absolutely must. If MOJ had not had that when I came in, there would have been nothing. They would not have been able to deliver. Not have been able to deliver. It just would not have worked. And I think that has been absolutely essential to our being successful. At this point, we're looking to see how we can maybe potentially help other departments, help them build up their own delivery capabilities. But you must have that. You absolutely must have that. And part of what we had to do to get there was build up our own recruitment team, because MOJ themselves, their own HR function, they really weren't able to handle that. They didn't know how to deal with this kind of stuff. We had to bring our own people ourselves. But now we're at the point where we're saying, well, great, yeah, there's a central team, but guess what? Inside each executive agency, we're going to start embedding people directly inside there as well. So digital will become everywhere in the MOJ. It's no longer the province of a team that's sitting in a tower. And the last thing, so I had 4 things I learned, and there are still 4 things which continue to bedevil me. And I'm just going to throw these out there, but one obviously is properly defining the MVPs, because it's really easy to say, yeah, just choose an MVP. But actually, it's not that easy, because the decision you make there is going to affect the evolution of the service going forward. So you really need to be very, very careful about that, and I think you need to spend a lot of time on that. If that's the one thing you spend time on, you probably should be spending time on that. Another huge issue for us is legacy systems and contracts. What we're trying to figure out now is how do we either unpick the contracts, or how do we obviate them by just replacing the systems? But that's a very radical move, and that's a very expensive move, and it's something which takes a lot of time. But it's a real problem. Civil service timelines are glacial. We all know that. So you have to plow through that. And service redesign. One thing which we noticed when I came in, or one thing which was sort of bedeviling our team for a while, was the idea that what we were just doing was just a digital service, and that assisted digital was something completely different to that. And I think that was a real misunderstanding on the part of the team. The service redesign is not just a digital service. It's the whole service, digital being one of the channels of that. And I think any team needs to think about that as well. Anyways, that's it for me. Those are the things I learned.
Thanks very much.